This is a 40-gallon aquarium that I use to breed my reticulated Hillstream loaches. For filtration and water movement, I'm using two Aquarium Co-op power heads connected to a pair of large sponge filters. The substrate is pool filter sand with a large pile of rounded river stones on top. I'm using high-intensity lights to grow lots of algae, and in this environment the loaches are thriving and even breeding on a regular basis. Let's take a closer look. The hair algae doesn't seem to bother the loaches, and I often see them combing through it in order to eat the numerous microorganisms that call the algae home. This dense algal growth also helps process some of the waste products produced by the fish, so it's actually very beneficial, but only up to a certain point, because if I let this algae continue to grow, it will cover these rocks completely, and we can't have that. If it gets too thick, the sections of algae that no longer get enough light will begin to die, and we don't want that either. So I have to carefully remove some of the algae on a regular basis, and we'll look at that process in just a few minutes. In addition to removing some of the algae, I also remove lots of snails on a regular basis as well. There are Malaysian trumpet snails, ram's horn snails, and bladder snails in this aquarium. I really don't mind the snails because they help clean up the leftover bits of food. My only worry is that they might be eating some of the loach's eggs. Nonetheless, there are still lots of eggs that make it past the snails, so there are several different generations of Hillstream loaches living in this river-style aquarium. In fact, here's a baby Hillstream loach, just a few days old, sitting on top of a bladder snail. And now it's time to clean up some of this algae. But before I start, I'd like to say that I love the look of this river-style aquarium just as it is. But the algae will become a problem for the fish if I let it go unchecked for too much longer. So it's time to remove as much of this algae as I can without disturbing the rocks too much, because there are a lot of loaches hiding inside this pile of river stones. I also plan on keeping this clump of guppy grass growing in the background. All right, so let's get to it then. I've attached two toothpicks to a small wooden dowel using a rubber band, and this is what I'll use to remove the hair algae. Yes, I know it's very primitive, but I find that it works really well. I just spin the dowel in a circle and the hair algae wraps around it. In the past, I've also used a siphon hose to remove the algae, but I think that I'm more likely to suck up baby loaches when I use the siphon method, so I prefer to do it this way. I don't usually let the algae get this thick, but I've been busy with other projects, and I knew that it would be a breeze to clean up. Plus, I have fun doing it. I focus on the task, and it almost has a meditative quality to it, where I become completely immersed in the little world that I've created, and the rest of the world just melts away. Now, once I've removed most of the algae using the dowel and the toothpicks, I'll use a siphon hose to remove as many ram's horn snails and bladder snails as I can. I don't clean the substrate, but every once in a while I'll detach the power head from the sponge filter and direct the flow at the rock pile, which sends up big clouds of mulm and detritus into the water column, which I then clean up with a siphon hose. This flushing of the rock pile keeps it from filling up with mulm and detritus and possibly even developing areas that are stagnant and anaerobic. I also think that it makes the rock pile a more sanitary resting place for the developing eggs. I do worry that when I remove these clumps of algae that I might also be removing eggs. And if I had a separate tank where I could keep all of the algae that I remove, I'd be willing to bet that some of those eggs would eventually hatch and baby loaches would begin to appear. And this is what it looks like when I'm done. The algae will regrow, but if I wanted to keep it from forming again, I'd reduce the intensity of the lights and the length of time that the lights are left on. Or I could keep the algae to a minimum by adding floating plants such as frogbit or red root floaters. But I really do prefer the way it looked in the beginning when there was lots of algae. But for some fish keepers, this might look like a nightmare. I think it's beautiful, and after having spent countless hours underwater in rivers, lakes, and ponds, I can assure you that this looks like something that you might see in the wild. And here we are, back at the beginning, before I remove the algae. I love this river-style aquarium, and I love these odd little fish. In the very near future, I'd also like to add several different colors of Neocaridina shrimp to this setup to make what is sometimes referred to as a Skittles tank. And yes, I realize that over time some of their offspring will be plain-colored wild-type shrimp. But I'm also hoping that I'll be able to remove the majority of the plain-colored babies and keep the tank looking nice with a great variety of different colored shrimp. I think they'll thrive in this mature aquarium with all the algae and the big pile of rocks. The baby shrimp should be safe with the loaches, and hopefully the shrimp don't eat the loaches' eggs. Time will tell, I guess, and I can't wait to see how it looks. It should make for a great video. And that brings us to the end of another journey. Thanks for watching, and I really hope that you have a beautiful day.